Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to our podcast where we help you learn English in a fun and easy way. I'm Linda, and I'm here with my friend Leo. Hey, Leo.
Hey, Linda. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Today's topic is something really interesting, don't you think?
Oh, yes. Today, we're talking about learning English, but we're going to look at two different ways of learning. One way is learning English in the real world, and the other is learning English in the classroom.
That's right. We'll talk about both ways and see which one is better, or maybe they're both good for different reasons. So, are you ready? Let's get started with part 1.
Okay, so let's start with learning English in the real world. What do we mean by the real world, Leo?
Good question. When we say real world, we mean learning English outside of the classroom. This is when you learn by talking to people, watching TV shows, listening to music, reading books, or even just traveling. You're not in a classroom with a teacher and textbooks, but you are still learning English.
Exactly. And do you know what's great about learning English this way? It feels natural. You're using English to communicate, to understand people, and to make yourself understood. It's real communication.
Yes, let's give some examples. Imagine you are traveling to a new country like the United States or the UK. When you talk to people in a cafe, ask for directions, or buy something from a store, you're using English in real life. You're learning without thinking, oh, this is a lesson, it's just part of your day.
That's such a good point, Leo. And it's not just traveling. You can learn English in the real world even in your own country. For example, you can watch English movies or TV shows with subtitles. You'll hear how people speak, the words they use, and the tone of their voices. And little by little, you'll start to understand more.
Exactly. And don't forget about music. Singing along to songs in English is a fun way to practice. Plus, when you look up the lyrics, you can learn new words and phrases. The same goes for podcasts and YouTube videos in English. They can help you listen to native speakers and improve your understanding.
Oh, for sure. And here's another real-world tip. If you have friends or people you know who speak English, try speaking with them as much as possible. Even if you're shy or make mistakes, that's okay. The important thing is to practice and not be afraid to try.
Yes, making mistakes is part of learning, right? The more you practice, the better you get. And sometimes you'll learn words or phrases that you won't find in textbooks. For example, in real-world English, people use a lot of slang, idioms, or short forms.
Oh, yes, like instead of saying hello, how are you? People might say, hey, what's up? Or instead of saying, I'm going to the store, they might say, I'm gonna go to the store. You learn these things when you hear people talk in the real world.
Exactly, and I think another cool thing is that learning English in the real world can help you understand different accents. In movies, music, or on YouTube, you might hear British English, American English, Australian English, or even people who are not native speakers but speak English well.
Oh, that's so true. And listening to different accents is really useful because English is spoken by people all around the world. It's not just about one country, and the more you listen, the better your ear gets at picking up different sounds.
Right, learning English in the real world can be fun, natural, and very useful. You're learning by doing, by listening, by speaking, and even by enjoying things like music or movies.
Yes, and remember, you don't have to travel far to learn English in the real world. You can start from home by watching videos, listening to songs, or even joining online communities where people speak English.
That's a great tip, Linda. And now, here's a question for our listeners. How do you like to learn English in the real world? Do you watch movies, listen to podcasts, or talk to friends? We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, let us know, and we'll talk about learning English in the classroom. How is it different from the real world?
Okay, and we talked about learning English in the real world, like through movies, music, traveling, and talking with people. And now we're going to explore learning English in the classroom, right, Linda?
That's right, Leo. Now, when we say learning in the classroom, we don't only mean a traditional classroom with desks and a teacher standing in front of a blackboard. We're also talking about any structured learning environment. It could be a language school, online classes, or even one-on-one tutoring. The key is that it's more organized and focused on teaching specific things like grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation.
Exactly, and learning English in the classroom has its own advantages. One big benefit is that you have a teacher who can guide you. The teacher knows what you need to learn and can explain things clearly. If you have any questions, you can ask the teacher right away. You can't always do that in the real world, right?
Yes, and I think another advantage is that in the classroom, you follow a plan. There's usually a course or a textbook that tells you what to study. This makes learning a lot easier because you know what to focus on each day. You won't get lost or feel like you don't know where to start.
That's a really good point. Sometimes when you're learning on your own in the real world, it can be hard to stay focused. You might watch a movie in English, but you won't always understand why people use certain words or phrases. In a classroom, the teacher can explain these things to you, like why we use I'm instead of IB or when to use add or on in sentences.
Yes, and that's really helpful, especially for beginners or people at an elementary level. In the classroom, you can learn step by step. You start with the basics, like how to introduce yourself, how to ask questions, and how to talk about daily activities. Then you move on to more difficult things, like using the past tense or talking about future plans.
Exactly. And don't forget about grammar. In the classroom, you learn grammar rules. Now, I know some people don't like grammar. It can feel boring or hard, right?
Oh, totally. But learning grammar is important if you want to speak English correctly. In the real world, people might not always speak perfectly. They might use slang or short forms. But in a classroom, you learn the correct way to say things. For example, you learn how to use he, she, and they correctly, or when to use the past tense, like I went or I did.
Yes, and once you understand the rules, it becomes easier to use English in everyday life. Knowing grammar helps you write better, too. So, if you need to write an email or a letter in English, the grammar you learn in the classroom will help you a lot.
That's so true. Another great thing about the classroom is that you're not learning alone. You're usually with other students, right?
Oh yes, definitely, and that's a big advantage because you can practice with your classmates. You can do speaking activities, role plays, or group work. It's a safe place to make mistakes and learn from them because everyone is learning just like you.
Exactly, in the classroom, you're not afraid to try. The teacher encourages you, and your classmates are learning too. You're all in the same boat, plus it can be fun. You can play games, do quizzes, or work on projects together. Learning English with others can be motivating because you see how everyone is improving over time.
And speaking of improving, the classroom can be a great place to get feedback. Your teacher can tell you what you're doing well and what you need to work on. Maybe you're really good at speaking but need more practice with listening. Or maybe you're good at writing but need help with pronunciation.
Yes, and sometimes, in the real world, no one corrects your mistakes. You might say something wrong, but people understand what you mean, so they don't say anything. In the classroom, the teacher can correct you and explain why it's wrong. That way, you learn from your mistakes and get better.
Absolutely. And what's cool about learning in a classroom today is that there are so many options. You don't have to go to a school building. You can take online classes from anywhere in the world. Some people like to take online courses because they can study at their own pace, and it's often cheaper.
Right, you can join live online classes where the teacher is there with you, or you can take pre-recorded lessons. Some people prefer live classes because they like interacting with the teacher and other students in real time. Others prefer recorded lessons because they can pause, rewind, and review the lesson as many times as they need.
That's a good point, and in the classroom, especially online, you can also find courses that match your level. Whether you're a beginner, elementary, or intermediate student, there's something for everyone. Plus, some classes focus on specific skills like listening, speaking, reading, or writing. You can choose the area you want to improve in.
Yes, and remember, learning in the classroom doesn't have to be boring. Many teachers use fun activities to make learning enjoyable. You might play vocabulary games, do listening exercises with music, or even act out scenes from a movie to practice speaking.
Absolutely, and classrooms today often use technology like apps, websites, and interactive tools to make learning more engaging. You might practice English with apps on your phone or play online games that help you build vocabulary and grammar skills.
I think that's one of the best things about learning in the classroom today. It's not just about sitting at a desk and reading a textbook anymore. There are so many ways to make learning interactive and fun.
Yes, and learning English in the classroom gives you structure, guidance, and a safe place to practice. You have a teacher to explain things, classmates to practice with, and a plan to follow. It's especially helpful if you want to learn the rules of English, like grammar and pronunciation, and get feedback on how you're doing.
Absolutely. And we talked about learning English in the real world. And we explored the benefits of learning in the classroom.
That's right, Linda, and now we're going to dive even deeper. We'll talk about the challenges of both methods and try to answer the big question, which way is better for learning English? Are you ready?
I'm ready. So let's start by looking at the challenges of learning English in the real world. Now, Leo, as we mentioned in part 1, learning in the real world can be fun and natural. You get to use English in everyday situations, but it's not always easy, is it?
No, it's not. One of the biggest challenges of learning in the real world is that it can be overwhelming, especially if you're a beginner or elementary level learner. Imagine going to a new country where everyone speaks English and you're trying to order food at a restaurant. You might not understand what people are saying and you might feel lost.
Oh yes, I can imagine that being really stressful. In the real world, people speak fast. They might use slang or phrases that you haven't learned yet. And when you're in a conversation, you don't always have time to stop and think about what someone is saying or how to respond.
Exactly, and in the real world, no one is there to help you understand. There's no teacher to explain things or slow down for you. It's sink or swim. This can be good for some people because it forces them to learn quickly, but for others, it might be too much, especially at the beginning.
Yes, and another challenge is that in the real world, you don't always get feedback. If you make a mistake, people might understand you, but they won't correct you. They just keep going with the conversation, and you might not even realize you've made a mistake.
That's such a good point, Linda. In the real world, communication is the main goal. People care more about getting the message across than correcting your grammar or pronunciation. While that's helpful for getting by, it's not great if you want to improve your English skills.
Exactly. And let's not forget that in some parts of the world, you might not have many opportunities to practice English in real life. If you live in a country where English isn't commonly spoken, it might be hard to find people to talk to. You might watch TV shows or listen to music in English, but it's not the same as having real conversations.
Yes, that's another big challenge. Without regular practice, it's harder to improve. You can't learn a language just by listening or watching. You need to speak, right, and interact with others to really get better.
So, to sum up the challenges of learning in the real world, it can be overwhelming. You might not get feedback on your mistakes, and in some places, it's hard to find opportunities to practice. But now let's switch gears and talk about the challenges of learning English in the classroom. What do you think, Leo?
Well, as we mentioned before, learning in the classroom has many advantages like structure, feedback, and a teacher to guide you. But it's not perfect either. One of the biggest challenges is that classroom learning can feel a bit slow or even boring for some people.
That's true. In the classroom, you follow a set schedule. You might spend weeks learning grammar rules or vocabulary lists, and for some people, that can feel like a lot of work without much fun. You're not always using English in real-life situations, so it can feel less exciting compared to learning in the real world.
Exactly, and another challenge is that in the classroom, you're often learning formal English. You might not learn everyday phrases or slang that people use in real-life conversations. So, when you go out into the real world, you might still feel unprepared.
That's a great point. In the classroom, you might learn how to write a formal email or how to ask for directions in a textbook example. But in real life, people speak differently. They might say, "Hey, what's up?" instead of "Hello, how are you?" So the classroom doesn't always prepare you for casual or informal English.
Yes, and sometimes the classroom can feel too controlled. You're not dealing with the unpredictability of real conversations. In a real conversation, people might interrupt you, change the subject, or ask unexpected questions. In the classroom, everything is planned out, so you don't always get that kind of practice.
That's so true. And another challenge for some learners is that classroom learning can be expensive or hard to access. Not everyone has the time or money to join an English class. And even if you can take online courses, they still require commitment, and sometimes the learning pace might not match your needs.
Exactly, some people might need more time to understand certain lessons, while others might feel like the class is moving too slowly. It can be hard to find a classroom experience that fits everyone's learning style and pace.
Yes, and there's also the issue of confidence. In the classroom, some students might feel shy or nervous about speaking in front of the teacher or other students. They might worry about making mistakes or sounding silly, which can stop them from practicing.
That's a really good point. In the classroom, it's easy to feel judged, even though everyone is there to learn. Some people feel more comfortable practicing English in real-world situations where it feels more casual and less stressful.
So, to sum up the challenges of classroom learning, it can feel slow or boring. It doesn't always teach you casual or real-life English, and it might not fit everyone's learning style or pace. Plus, some people feel nervous about speaking in class.
Right. Now, let's get to the big question. Which way is better? Learning English in the real world or in the classroom? What do you think, Linda?
That's a tough one. I don't think there's a simple answer. Both methods have their pros and cons, and it really depends on the person and their learning style. For some people, learning in the real world is the best way because it's more natural, and they love the challenge of figuring things out as they go.
Yes, and for others, the classroom is a better choice because they need the structure, guidance, and feedback that a teacher provides. It's especially helpful if you're just starting out or if you're looking to improve specific skills, like grammar or writing.
Exactly. I think the best way to learn English is to combine both methods. Use the classroom to build a strong foundation. Learn the rules, the grammar, and the formal aspects of English. But also make sure to practice in the real world as much as you can. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, talk to people, and use English in everyday situations.
I couldn't agree more. The classroom gives you the tools, and the real world gives you the practice. If you combine both, you get the best of both worlds. You'll learn the rules in the classroom, but you'll also learn how to communicate naturally in the real world.
That's a great way to put it, Leo. So, for our listeners, if you're learning English, try to balance both approaches. If you're in a class, don't stop there. Find ways to use what you've learned outside of class. And if you're learning on your own in the real world, consider taking a class or a course to strengthen your skills.
Yes, and remember, everyone's learning journey is different. What works for one person might not work for someone else. The key is to keep practicing, keep trying, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Whether you're learning in the classroom or the real world, every bit of practice helps.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, we'd love to hear from our listeners. How do you prefer to learn English? Do you like the structure of the classroom, or do you enjoy the challenge of the real world? Or maybe you're like us and think a combination of both is the best way.
Yes, let us know. We love hearing your thoughts and experiences. And remember, no matter how you choose to learn, the most important thing is to keep going. Learning a language takes time, but with patience and practice, you'll get there.
That's right. So thank you all for joining us for this podcast. Bye for now.
Goodbye.